All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're embarking on a fascinating journey through one of the most genuinely transformative 600-year periods in human history. We're looking at the historical evolution of Jewish identity and the incredibly dramatic, cataclysmic fall of ancient Jerusalem. Relying strictly on historical and archaeological records from our source material, we're going to trace how successive, massive empires fundamentally reshaped a single, hugely important piece of geography. It's a story of survival, rebellion, and just profound transformation.
And before we get too deep, I want to challenge you with the question you see here. How much of what we commonly understand about this era is based on the theological narrative, and how much is actually rooted in hard archaeological evidence? It's pretty easy to blur the lines between sacred texts and historical records. So today, we're pulling back the curtain to see how the administrative decisions of ancient empires practically forged the religious identities we'd recognize today.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The Persian province of Yehud. 2. Forging a new identity. 3. Hellenistic and Hasmonean rule. 4. The rise of Herod. 5. The Roman destruction. And finally, 6. The Bar Kokhba revolt. Let's jump right into Chapter 1.
Section 1. The Persian province of Yehud.
We're starting our timeline in the late 6th century BCE. The Babylonian exile has ended and a new global superpower has taken control, the Persian Empire. This marks a massive reset for the returning populations. Take the term Yehud. When the Persians allowed exiles to return, they established the small administrative province named Yehud, which was derived from the ancient kingdom of Judah. But here's the absolutely crucial point from our source. Initially, this term was purely geographic. It was literally just an administrative zone. Being a Judahite, or what would later translate to Jewish, originally meant that you just resided in this specific Persian province, totally regardless of your background. It wasn't yet the distinct, unified religious or ethnic identity it would eventually become.
Section 2. Forging a new identity. So, how did a simple administrative zone transform into a unified religious culture? Well, our source material refers to the centuries between the late 6th and early 2nd centuries BCE as a sort of historical blackout. It's a time with very little hard historical documentation, but immense theological development. During this time, the Persian administration, aided by figures like Ezra and Nehemiah, sought to organize a highly diverse population of returnees and locals, and this brilliantly illustrates the intersection of empire and religion. They used something called the Law of the King, these legal and social codes backed by the Persian court, to basically synthesize local traditions with Persian administrative needs. This unified the community, effectively laying the groundwork for Judaism as an organized religion centered around the temple in Jerusalem.
Section 3. Hellenistic and Hasmonean rule.
As centuries passed, empires fell. The Persian Empire gave way to the Greeks, and eventually this region fell under Hellenistic influence. During the Persian era, the province generally experienced peaceful autonomy and gradual integration. But as Hellenistic empires started fracturing, a local Jewish dynasty known as the Hasmoneans or Maccabees revolted and actually established an independent state by 142 BCE. Unlike their predecessors, the Hasmonean era was characterized by violent expansion. Our source explicitly details how this dynasty operated much like a colonial power, conquering surrounding territories and forcibly converting neighboring populations, like the Idumeans, to Judaism at sword point just to consolidate their state.
If you look at this topographical map showing the Maccabean expansions, you can visually see this aggression. They pushed far beyond the original borders of Yehud, extending their military reach all the way across the Jordan River and throughout the wider region of Palestine. This really wasn't just about religious freedom anymore. It was an era of intense, forceful territorial conquest.
Section 4. The rise of Herod.
Independent empires rarely last forever in this part of the world. Enter the Romans. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey conquered Jerusalem, stripping the Hasmoneans of their massive territories. To govern what was left, Rome installed a new, highly controversial ruler. To really understand who King Herod the Great was, you've got to look at his backing. Placed into power around 37 BCE with the heavy military support of Rome, specifically Octavian, Herod had a massive legitimacy problem. He was of Idumean, or Arab heritage, which was a population forcibly converted by the Hasmoneans a generation earlier. Because of this, traditionalists in Jerusalem never truly viewed him as Jewish and treated him with deep, enduring suspicion. So to compensate and project power, Herod engaged in unprecedented architectural and territorial expansions. He was basically trying to physically cement a legacy his bloodline couldn't buy.
Notice the sheer physical footprint here. On the left, we've got the older, much smaller platform of Zerubbabel. On the right, the massive Herodian temple platform. Herod completely transformed the very topography of Jerusalem. He turned the Temple Mount into one of the largest architectural marvels of the ancient world. But remember, this wasn't just piety, right? This was Rome's proxy king using stone and mortar to legitimize his highly controversial rule over a population that, frankly, largely despised him.
Section 5. The Roman Destruction.
Following Herod's death, direct Roman rule became increasingly brutal. The city was basically a powder keg. The rebellion against Rome wasn't just about a foreign occupation, it was heavily fueled by internal class warfare. First, there was extreme socioeconomic despair. Crushing Roman taxes were absolutely devastating the poor, while the aristocratic classes lived in luxury. This severe inequality birthed radical violent factions like the Sicarii, led by figures like Menahem, who targeted not only Romans but also wealthy Jewish elites. By 66 CE, this internal chaos erupted into a full-scale rebellion, ultimately drawing the furious, heavily calculated response of the Roman Empire, the brutal siege by Titus in 70 CE.
Ground yourself in the layout of the city's defensive walls here. When Titus arrived, he didn't just blindly attack. He systematically sealed every single exit, cutting off all food and supplies. The internal fighting among the rebels inside the walls was just as deadly as the Romans waiting outside. It was a perfectly executed, incredibly devastating trap.
And the climax of the siege? It's apocalyptic. In the summer of 70 CE, Roman forces breached the inner defenses. Despite some reported hesitation from Titus to destroy a sacred site, the temple caught fire. The destruction was absolute. As we can see from the records, Roman soldiers looted the immense treasures of the burning temple, carrying them all the way back to Rome to fund and decorate the Arch of Titus. That grand structure Herod built to legitimize his rule was literally reduced to ash and rubble.
Section 6. The Bar Kokhba Revolt.
Now, you might think the story ends there, but this final chapter, occurring about 60 years later, is what effectively wiped the ancient city completely off the map. Sometime around 13 CE, the Roman Emperor Hadrian decided to completely erase the memory of Jerusalem. He began building a brand new Roman pagan city directly on top of the ruins, naming it Aelia Capitolina. He even erected a temple to the Roman god Jupiter right over the sacred site of the old temple. This profound insult sparked a second, massive, and highly organized uprising led by Simon Bar Kokhba.
580,000. Take a quick moment to let that number sink in. According to the Roman historian Dio Cassius, this is the staggering number of casualties inflicted during the war. The Romans didn't rush this time around. They used a slow, incredibly brutal strategy of systematic suppression, village by village, fortress by fortress, to crush the Bar Kokhba revolt entirely.
The aftermath in 135 CE wasn't just a military defeat, it was an intentional cultural and geographic erasure. 985 villages were completely leveled. Those who survived were rounded up and sold into slavery at prices cheaper than a horse. And finally, the ultimate decree. Jews were legally banned from even stepping foot inside the new Roman city of Aelia Capitolina on pain of death. The geographic anchor of the religious identity forged centuries earlier under the Persians was totally severed.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound thought. When the Roman Empire wiped ancient Jerusalem off the map, scattering its people and erasing its name, did they destroy its history, or did that very act of absolute destruction untether the identity from the geography, virtually guaranteeing its immortality for the next 2 millennia? It's truly incredible how the administrative lines drawn by the Persians, the violent expansions of the Hasmoneans, and the brutal erasure by the Romans all compounded to shape the world we know today. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating history with me on this explainer. I hope you found it as captivating as I did. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.